moon shifting its position. With a team from the University of Hawaii have discovered we are about to witness the disturbing effects of the moon in real time. And this is thanks to the moon shifting its position. They call it the moon wobble. What exactly is going on with the moon? It turns out the moon is more mysterious than we thought. The crafty satellite has ways of surprising us. While the moon appears to move in circles and ovals, there is another factor in its rotation and revolutions, and that is what is going to cause trouble for us big time. We are already seeing the effects of climate change as the ocean and sea levels keep rising. However, it's about to get even worse for coastal towns. Of course, scientists have known about the moon's wobble for centuries, but the possible effects are just staring us in the face. NASA is particularly concerned about how the effect of the moon wobble would exacerbate the climactic problems the Earth is already entering, but the possible effects are just staring us in the face. NASA is particularly concerned about how the effect of the moon wobble would exacerbate the climactic problems the Earth is already entering, but the possible effects are just staring us in the face. NASA is particularly concerned about how the effect of the moon wobble would exacerbate the climactic problems the Earth is already facing. As we said earlier, high tides are caused by the pull of the moon's gravity on the Earth as the planet spins, making two tides appear every day. The moon also goes around the Earth approximately once a month in an orbit that is a little bit tilted. If we want to be more accurate, the moon's orbital plane around the Earth is at about a 5-degree incline to the Earth's orbital plane around the Sun. Due to this, the moon's orbit seems to fluctuate over time. It completes a full cycle or nodal cycle every 18.6 years. This notably happens on a slow scale. However, at definite points along the cycle, the moon's gravitational pull occurs from such an angle that it drags one of the day's two high tides a little bit higher, while the second one comes a little bit lower. By now, you should have noted that the moon is not necessarily wobbling itself. Also, the moon is still pulling on the Earth with the usual force. Of course, even before the effect of the moon's wobble was known, scientists were expecting significantly more high tide flooding. But in getting their predictions of these tides, the researchers have to work through lots of noisy data, as they have to deal with complex weather patterns, astronomical events, and regional tidal variation. The moon wobble is now part of the data they have to plug in for their simulations. NASA scientists say moon wobble will enhance the effective sea level. They are saying every coast in the US is at risk of dramatically increased floods as we move deeper into this decade. However, we might get a moment of respite while the moon is yet to get into its tide-amplifying cycle. The higher seas, which are amplified by the lunar cycle, will cause a leap in flood numbers on almost all US mainland coastlines and even Hawaii and Guam. Only far northern coastlines, including Alaska's, will be spared for some time because the land areas are rising due to long-term geological processes. So just how serious will the flooding be? You might be able to recollect some devastating floods of recent times, but NASA says the moon wobbling will cause the number of flooding incidents to triple or quadruple. That is a scary future. Using 2019 as a baseline where scientists predicted 600 floods, it is hard to quantify the effects of the increased flooding NASA is expecting. Low-lying areas are the most at risk due to the increase in flooding, but it will only get worse in time. Using models, researchers have been able to describe how these floods will look, and some of these floods could happen in clusters, meaning they may last more than a month. Depending on the positioning of the moon, sun, and Earth, cities may experience a flood on consecutive days or every other day. The researchers discovered these tipping points by observing 89 tide gauge locations in every coastal US state and territory, excluding Alaska. They created a new statistical framework that mapped commonly used sea level rise scenarios and flooding thresholds, the number of times those thresholds have been exceeded annually, astronomical cycles, and statistical representations of other processes, such as El Niño events that are known to affect tides. Based on all of this, they produced projections into the 2080s. They are continuing the study, so they plan to update the flood tool in the future. Having such frequent flooding can result in heavy economic damage. Imagine a city getting flooded 10 or 15 times a month. Businesses can't continue operating when their car parks are under feet of water. People will lose their jobs because they can't get to work. There will be health crises due to the seeping cesspools of water. This is before accounting for damages to critical infrastructure like water supplies, power generation, communication equipment, and more. Farmers too may lose all their crops and animals when they are submerged underwater, which will lead to food insecurity. All told, the US alone could be looking at trillions of dollars in damages. These floods are different from ordinary high-tide floods that may reach about 2 feet in depth and are called nuisance floods because they are more of a nuisance than outright calamity. NASA hopes the release of its findings will help at-risk cities take measures to prevent too much damage. It is important that they start preparing now, as the flooding can last a decade once they start. Rising sea levels have already made living on the coast risky. Some experts say it may have played a role in the catastrophic collapse of a condo building in Surfside, Florida. However, the effects of the moon wobble will be felt all over the world. In the UK, for instance, low-lying areas in Scotland with rivers and coasts nearby are among those often prone to flooding, and recent outlooks by climate awareness organisation Climate Central say that many coastal areas of the UK, including parts of Falkirk, Fife and Glasgow, as well as English areas like Grimsby, Hull and Southport, could be below water level by 2050. Scientists are expecting the moon wobbling to amplify flooding in these places. Let's hear your thoughts on NASA's warning of flooding in the comments section below.